So you wanted to talk about Salman Rushdie this week. I don't know anything about this guy, really. I haven't read his books. I know he's pretty well liked in the literature sort of circles, but other than that, I'm completely ignorant to his work. I just know he wrote the Satanic Verses, so I assumed it was like some sort of goth book for like high school kids, but could be wrong about that.
Yeah, that's what it is. It was written exclusively for children that shop at Hot Topic. He wrote it while wearing Jinkos.
Yeah, of course. He wrote it with a feather quill.
Yeah, and like one of those little silver fake nails that kind of like wraps around your pinky. You know what I'm talking about? So anyways, Salman Rushdie back in the news recently. Probably not for something that he would have liked. It was, I guess, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago now, Rushdie went to the Chautauqua, New York. It's like a literary festival that they have in Chautauqua, New York, to give a lecture to a group of visitors and festival goers with Ralph Henry Reese. He's this guy that runs this organization that provides sanctuary to writers under threat of political persecution. At the festival, he was attacked on stage and repeatedly stabbed by a young man, Hadi Matar. Normally in the U.S., a single simple victim stabbing isn't much to talk about and wouldn't normally make the news. However, Rushdie has an interesting history with being under threat of attack, and he's kind of been a nexus for the discussion about the U.S.'s clash with, I guess you'd call it Islamism, for like 40 years now. So we'll just briefly go over Matar, the attacker. He's not terribly interesting, and then we'll go into Rushdie a little bit.
Stabbed him in the face. He messed him up.
Yeah, he stabbed him, I don't know, it was like 8-9 times. One in the eyeball. Like apparently Rushdie's going to lose an eye. He stabbed him in the liver, chest, arm, shoulder. And he's like a 72-year-old man. So
yeah, but he should still know how to do a double leg. I mean, come on, what the fuck?
Yeah, Rushdie.
Yeah,
I would think so. I would think you would have learned. I would think, well, after what he dealt with like 40 years ago, you would maybe, or 30 years ago, I guess. You'd put a little bit into self.
A couple classes, yeah.
Take a Taibo class, something, buddy. Jesus.
Yeah, watch a Steven Seagal movie. Just disarm the opponent.
I don't know. He's been apparently Rushdie, like his wife is like a supermodel, so he's like, I guess he got a lot of money and fame, and he just goes around banging like dime piece broads all the time. So I can respect that. You didn't have a time. You had some hot dates to meet up with, but So anyways, Mr. Matar. His role is not terribly interesting in this whole thing. He's this 24-year-old man. He was living in New Jersey, American-born. In 2018, he traveled to Lebanon for 3 weeks. When he come back, I guess he seemed a lot more moody and withdrawn. But I guess he went there to get in touch with his ancestral roots. I imagine this be the same thing. Like if I went to Italy, I come back talking like I was from out of the cast of The Sopranos, calling everyone a Marone. It really seemed like Matar was kind of like an incel. He didn't seem, when he perpetrated the attack, he accredited it to the Iranian Defense Force, who have claimed Rushdie as an enemy for some time. It doesn't seem like he actually had any connection with them. He just seems kind of like an incel that was looking for community and wanted to attack this guy to get some notoriety.
Or he was mad that Rushdie was banging such a hot broad and he can't fucking get laid at all. Payback.
That might be it. Yeah. This whole thing, I guess the incel part, it just kind of goes double for that. So anyways, a little bit about Rushdie. So Rushdie is this acclaimed Indian-British author. He's been publishing for decades. He first rose to international acclaim with his 1981 novel, Midnight's Children. He's wrote a bunch. Anyways, his fourth novel that he wrote in 1989 was The Satanic Verses, and that brought him some hate. Incidentally, so I've never read a full book of his, but I've read like large parts of a couple of his books. They're written in like this older style that's a lot more reminiscent of like Oscar Wilde or Hemingway, in which I mean that there's no superheroes or sword fights, so they're like pretty dull.
I was going to ask what genre of fantasy this was, but I guess it's just...
Yeah, no elves, no Battle of Pelennor Fields. Anyways, so the book Satanic Verses, it's kind of this magical tale of these two immigrants that escape death on their way to Britain. One takes on the shape of an angel, the other takes on the shape of the devil. From what I understand, it's supposed to be an allegory for the immigrant experience with undertones of dealing with mental illness. I don't know, whatever. It's boring as shit. Though his writing is top-notch and his use of language is pretty fantastic. So it is fun to read if you like reading boring shit.
Nerd alert.
So in 1988, Rushdie was living in Britain when the Satanic Verses were released. Throughout the book, there are these recurring dream sequences from one of the protagonists. In one of these dreams, there is a character named Mahound, who is Muhammad. So Mahound apparently was an old English, it was like a name that the British colonizers used for Muhammad that was like meant to be degrading. But yeah, so there's a character named Mahound who is supposed to be Muhammad. So what are the Satanic Verses? So this part is actually pulled from a really interesting part of early Islamic history. So of course, at the time of Muhammad, the area in which he lived was polytheistic, as were many of the other neighboring lands. Just like the Bible we have today, the Quran underwent several changes over the years, and unlike the Bible, many can be linked directly to the Prophet because there's such a kind of direct lineage of schools of thought and scholars to the Prophet. So the story that is referenced is not in the modern Quran, but was in an earlier recited version. Either way, the story itself comes from a number of early Islamic biographers. So the story of this is the real Satanic Verses, not the book that Rushdie wrote. Story goes that as Muhammad was traveling around the Arabian Peninsula, trying to rally support for his cause and his new religion, he traveled to the wealthy city of Mecca. Muhammad, trying to sway the people of Mecca, was not able to do so because he knew his religion would not accept the three polytheistic gods of their city. Since Muhammad wasn't able to get support by denying their gods in his recitation, which was essentially him giving a live in-person recitation of what God was directly telling him. So he was in Mecca. This is what he would do. He would go to these places and he would channel what God was telling him at that particular point in time.
Sure he would.
Yeah, obviously. That's definitely not made up. But anyway, so he couldn't get the people of Mecca on board with him denying their gods. So he come back. He did another recitation in which he accepts the three polytheistic gods of their city. This is how he's able to get Mecca on board. Of course, he ends up
He was bullshitting them.
He was bullshitting them. He told him the story. He told him the story that he wanted to tell that didn't work for him. He told him a story that they wanted to hear so he could get them on board for his conquering. And then later on in his life, somebody asked him, hey, if Allah is the one true God, how are these other three gods fit into this story? And apparently what Muhammad told them was that must have been Satan whispering to him at that point in time and not God. And so that's where the idea of these Satanic Verses comes in. It's an interesting little part of history. So anyways, Rushdie kind of uses the idea. It's not even a main point of the story, but he uses this idea as a device in literature to kind of explore it. And a lot of people got upset about it.
That he brought it up? That he mentioned it? Is it
yes.
Banished from the history of Islam?
So the story itself I guess it's kind of controversial in Islam today. There's different schools of thought about whether or not it's a true story. There's a lot of early Islamic scholars that will accept that it happened, quote unquote happened. And there's a lot that aren't, but I think the association with Muhammad having recited something that Satan told him is just so inflammatory to them that, it's especially for an outsider, for a non-Muslim to talk about it, it was a bit too much for him. Okay, so though it's not in the modern Quran, this is a well-known and generally accepted part of Islamic traditions. So the book itself, it deals with a similar character making the pronouncement that his followers must adopt these three old polytheistic deities, but later renounces them for the same reason as the actual Muhammad. There's another sequence in the book about a group of people in India enticed to take a foot pilgrimage to Mecca. The fanatics state that they'll walk across the Arabian Sea. Spoiler alert, it doesn't turn out well for them. They can't actually walk on water. And then there's a last sequence, a dream sequence in the book that introduces a character called the Imam, who is essentially like a caricature of Khomeini. In each part of the book, it deals with and represents Muslims as fanatics, I guess. Not all Muslims at fanatics, but the ones in the story, it represents kind of in a fanatical way. And they were so upset about this that they started rioting and burning places all across to prove that they weren't fanatics.
Really? There was riots over this book?
Oh, there was murders. Places burnt down. It was kind of a big deal.
Fucking babies, dude.
Yeah, to show the world that fanaticism isn't deeply rooted in Islam, much of the entire Islamic world rose up in outrage. So this is when the book banning started. Of course, it initially only started in countries that were really deeply rooted in Islam. So Pakistan, Iran, obviously. Then the Ayatollah Khomeini at the time the theocratic leader of Iran, he goes on state television to pronounce a fatwa against Rushdie, which is a fatwa being a death sentence, and making it incumbent upon all Shiite Muslims to carry out or aid in carrying out the murder of Salman Rushdie.
Ayatollah Khamenei said the death sentence was still valid and must be carried out. Mr. Rushdie, he said, had committed blasphemy. He would have to be executed. The power of Ayatollah Khomeini's religious and political legacy was demonstrated at his funeral last summer. Faced by that and with the demands of Iran's unbending senior clerics, the country's new leadership has to show it remains loyal to his memory. The anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, which brought Khomeini to power, is this weekend. It's no coincidence that his successor as spiritual leader chose today to remind his people of the legacy Khomeini left Mr. Rushdie.
It's not really blasphemy if Rushdie's not like a devout Muslim.
Yeah, so he came from a Muslim family, so it would have also been apostasy.
Yeah, but I'm sure he's not like a devout believer.
He was not. He was come from a liberal Muslim family, then he'd become an atheist, I guess, pretty early on in his life, which made it that much worse, I guess, because apostasy is one of the biggest sins in Islam.
If God is all powerful, do you think he really cares about like some shitty book some asshole wrote? I doubt it.
Apparently so. Apparently that's one of his number one concerns. But, who am I to say so? So, yeah, Rushdie at the time, he had to go into hiding with round-the-clock armed guards, much to the consternation of the British establishment. It was a recurring theme in the West amongst everybody in power that they might give token siding with Rushdie on the ideal of adherence to the principles of free speech, but a lot of people seem to be really upset with him that he would piss off the Muslim world, which he certainly did. But a lot of people felt like that was a lot more, that his writing the book and pissing them off was a lot more serious of a crime than their being upset at the book and the kind of the threats and public displays of violence that were rampant worldwide at the time. So they had there was several publishing houses in different countries around the world that released the book that were attacked. Two of the individuals responsible for translating it were attacked. One of them killed. I believe that was the Japanese translator that was actually killed, stabbed, actually, just like Rushdie was stabbed on stage. Yeah, so this brings, I guess, to the interesting part of the whole Rushdie affair was what I was talking about just a second ago, was the response by Western governments and liberal commentators in the West to the whole incident, saying there was kind of a general sense that while Rushdie had maybe the right to do it, it would have been wrong for him to do it because he knew that it would be inflammatory, and I guess you're literally attacking something that was so sacred and meaningful to a large population of people, and that it was just stupid, inflammatory, and that maybe he got what he deserved to a certain degree.
I guess the thing that pissed him off was portraying Muslims as fanatical. That's what actually irritated him, or was it just talking about the Satanic Verses, which are not supposed to be talked about in polite company or whatever?
Well, yeah. So there are certain sects of Muslims that, I guess the Shiite Muslims is the ones I'm talking about in particular, that view the idea of the Satanic Verses as an infidel lie, like a plot by the Western colonizers to discredit, to slander the Prophet Muhammad for their own purposes. And so, yeah, it's very inflammatory from their perspective to even bring it up because they feel it's a lie. Like I say, though, that's Shiite Muslims. There are a lot of other Muslim sects that accept it and just say, yeah, this is just part of our history. And, I guess they would relate the idea of Muhammad having conversation with Satan in much the same way that in Christian mythology, Jesus, goes out into the desert with Satan for 40 days and 40 nights and has his temptation. So anyways, bad parts of this. This is kind of where the Western commitment to the free exchange of ideals was usurped by fear of violence and by fear of being called a bigot. Protesters in Pakistan attacked the American Cultural Center, which had nothing to do with Rushdie. The Commission for Racial Equality held seminars on the Rushdie affair where they invited Muslim academics that promoted the idea of a negotiated compromise that would protect Muslim sensibilities against gratuitous provocation. The Union of Islamic Students Association of Europe, which was the largest collective of Islamic students in Europe, issued a statement offering to commit murder for Khomeini. You had people like George Sabah, who is the director of the Near East Studies Center at UCLA, who told an interviewer that Khomeini was completely within his rights to call for Rushdie's death. Had playwright Arthur Miller. He was the victim of the Red Scare trials under McCarthy in the 50s, also known for dicking down Marilyn Monroe. You had these groups of left-wing intellectuals, people like Arthur Miller. Hitchens talked about these people they would be very quick if it were some South American dictatorship that was cracking down on free speech and journalism to rally support for them and to speak out on their behalf. And when it come to speaking out against this particular attack and speaking out in favor of Rushdie, they either wouldn't do it or would just outright say that they were scared to do it.
Well, there's also the revolution was just a few years earlier. I wonder if there was more context that we're not really aware of because, it's 4 decades later. I wonder if Rushdie wrote this following the Iranian or following the revolution as like a fuck you to Khomeini or something to that effect, or it was interpreted that way. You know what I mean? In the left.
Well, he definitely had the character of the imam in there that was pretty directly, like I said, I can't say it because there's probably a lot of context that, I'm missing out on of what was going on in the news at that time. But from what I'm reading, the character of the imam was supposed to be this caricature of Imam Khomeini, and it was supposed to be incendiary towards him.
Huh, interesting.
It doesn't seem like the character, even the character of Mahound, it doesn't seem like it's meant to be intentionally incendiary towards anybody. Like I'd mentioned, it's the story also touches on mental illness. So it is a schizophrenic person that is having these dreams. So I don't know. Not that it matters. He should be able to do it anyways.
Sure. Yeah, but just context is important. If he's going after Khomeini, it's kind of like going after George Washington, 5 years after the American Revolution. It's going to piss off some people.
Well, he definitely did. Did. But yeah, so if you want to play the last clip down there, this is my boy.
Seems like everybody's being really supportive of Rushdie now after this attack.
Yeah, I think it got thrown in a lot of people's faces, the bad takes that they had on the Rushdie affair back in the 80s. I know just recently in 2020, Rushdie, Chomsky, J.K. Rowling, there's a bunch of other actual left-wing people, authors, had all got together and wrote or signed on to this essay in support of journalistic freedom across the country. I don't know what it was in reference to, but
it was in reference to the cancel culture, basically. I remember that.
Okay.
J.K. Rowling has faced a lot of oppression.
I just wonder what Chomsky thinks about having to sign on with the author of a book about witches and wizards. If we ever get on here, we'll do it.
There's a mistake at the heart of what you say that though you are for free speech, you aren't for the exercise of free speech if it offends Muslims, and you say that that is the line that we draw. As a matter of fact, you're in error. First Amendment to the Constitution allows anyone who wants to insult anyone they like, in any way they choose. That includes belief in religion, which is especially given no particular protection by that amendment, which is in fact rightly described as the cornerstone of our liberty. Now, that's just the fact of the matter. I can say what I like about your religion, and you can say what you like about my humanism, and I will not attempt to prevent you from doing that. In fact, so far from that, I would defend anyone who tried to make you be silent. That is the foundation of what we call the Enlightenment. It's terrible to have to be saying this, because it's ABC, but there it is. Now, to your point about the insult, I have read the book, I don't know if you have, and I'm clear in my mind that no insult to the Prophet or to those who believe in the God of whom he's the messenger is intended. The words that are complained of are spoken by a sick man suffering from paranoid schizophrenia in a dream in which he believes himself to be the Archangel Gabriel, who is a Christian icon. So I think that's about as far fictionally as you could go to avoid the charge of blasphemy. But I must add that if Salman Rushdie had wished to be blasphemous, had wished to challenge the tenets of your faith, that would also be his right. So don't confuse me in giving you two answers. I mean them to be separate but related.
So yeah, during this, it was a lot of people on the left for whatever reason, at the time seemed to have, I think, what people in retrospect would say was a wrong take. And there seemed to be quite a few people on the right that I would say had the right take. Now, obviously Hitchens at the time, however he ended up, back then he would still openly refer to himself as a socialist. I would imagine he'd definitely be on the left back then, but you had statements from him in support of, unequivocally in support of Rushdie. President Bush, the elder, he actually made a really poignant statement, kind of unequivocally in support of Rushdie and free speech at the time. And then you had people like Chomsky at the time that he didn't. I read as much as I could find that Chomsky had published in reference to the matter, and it's just not that much. He only brings it up in a compendium that he wrote to manufacturing consent as saying that what happened with the Rushdie affair wasn't that big a deal, that the real censorship was what was happening to his book, where he was kind of relating it more to the idea of manufacturing consent and the kind of quiet censorship as being the real problem, not the loud, overt censorship. And it is important to say, it didn't work. His book wasn't censored. The book was doing well before that. And then, as one would expect, after this all started happening, his book just become an insane international bestseller. It was just flying off the shelves everywhere. So
it's one of the most famous authors of all time at this point.
Yeah. And it's because of this, undoubtedly, he's a good writer. He would have had, I'm sure, either way, would have had a lot of respect in the literary community.
Did he plan this? Did he plan this whole thing out, you think?
That's what I'm getting at. I had a workers' comp claim where I got a little bit of money for my knee, and I might make that trade again, So now you get international love and fame and millions of dollars, and you get stabbed in the eye. I might take that deal, James. I might take that deal.
He's going to have so many flowers in his hospital room. So
yeah.
Much love.
Plus, some supermodel blowing him while he's laying there getting a morphine drip. Fuck, dude.
Can't beat that.
Jesus. No, you can't. So, yeah, Rushdie, it was all set up. That's the point of this whole thing.
Yeah, this was 1988 clickbait. He was way ahead of the game.
Exactly. Rushdie on top of shit back in the 80s. Yeah. So, I don't know. It's an interesting addendum to to a story that's been going on for a long time.
I feel like Hitchens has written way worse shit than Rushdie about the Islamic faith. He's never got a fatwa put on him.
Yeah, there's certainly. Well, I think he has. He just hasn't had a fatwa put on him by a figure that had as much reach as the Ayatollah Khomeini. So,
I probably think he's just too smooth.
And yeah, back to your point, anybody can do a fatwa. Just you might not be listened to if you do it, James. Is I guess what I'm getting at. Like I said, during the original fatwa, he had a bounty. I think at the time it was $2 million that was put on his head that was supposed to be backed up by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, or they were the ones offering it. So it was the actual Iranian state. They were reached out to recently, right after this, to ask if that was still on his head. And in response to the recent attack Rushdie suffered, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Nasir Kanani said, "We do not consider anyone other than Rushdie and his supporters worthy of blame and even condemnation." So they're still sticking with the line.
They didn't make a definitive statement on the money, though.
Yeah, but we're not going to give up on the. We're not going to pay out. Well, I mean, I guess he didn't kill him, so you don't get the reward if you don't actually kill him, right? Because the fatwa was for his death,
right? But they didn't confirm that the money is still available. They're just implying that it is, so they can get the fatwa accomplished.
Are you saying the Iranian National Guard isn't to be trusted? I don't know about that.
I trust all religious fundamentalists. I think they're great. It's pretty crazy that people still believe this stuff. I don't want to get into this again. This always baffles me, dude. You can Google this shit, right?
Yeah.
Is God real, Google? Let me ask.
I wonder what Google says. The first result answers in fucking Genesis. That's the Creationist Institute that is run out of Kentucky, actually. So they're the ones that made the big ark up there right outside Cincinnati. Have you seen that?
The ark? There's an ark?
The ark. Yeah, your tax dollars paid for it, buddy. Too, by the way.
A boat or
like a boat? It's not an actual boat. It's an amusement park that was built. It's a creationist amusement park where they built this giant fucking boat that looks like Noah's Ark, because that's what it's supposed to be. And you go in there and you learn about how Noah, during the flood, put 2 animals of each kind on there. And, the dinosaurs were too big, so he left them off the boat. And, God gets mad when you play with your wiener. All that type of shit. And it was I want to say it was built like 10, 15 years ago. And it was a bit of a scandal at the time because they got, I forget, it was like $10, $20 million in state grant money to build it because it was supposed to promote tourism. It didn't promote, nobody goes to the fucking thing.
I would go to it.
I think most of the people that go to it are atheists that go there to clown on it.
Yeah.
So I've seen so many videos of that type of thing, like prominent atheists going there and just fucking messing with the teenagers that are, that are like supposed to run it. Like, it's like trying to get in debates with these fucking kids that are just there as like a job. Like, come on, man, leave me alone. But maybe we'll have to do that field trip sometime. Go to the Ark Museum.
You ever seen what the angels are supposed to look like? Like, I just learned this. There's descriptions of them apparently in the Bible, and they're fucking crazy.
Yeah, it's like a trip. They're real trippy.
Yeah, like 20-eyed monsters and shit.
Yeah, they have wheels on wheels and 9 heads each with 9 eyes per head, or all sorts of craziness like that. They're not really pretty. I think they can take on a pretty form, but their true forms are pretty monstrous. Because I know, like, the story of Lot. I was actually talking about this with my daughter just the other day. Lot was the one godly man that lived in Sodom, and he was visited by 2 angels, and apparently they were pretty hot, and all the townspeople wanted to fuck them. And Lot, being a good guy, he threw his daughters out there for the townspeople to rape because he's a good guy, and he didn't want them to be angel fuckers.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So they can be hot. I don't know how hot they actually are.
I just assumed they all looked like John Travolta or whatever,
Yeah.
Now they get you. They're under the goddamn